okay with that introduction with music by Elmer Bernstein from the great motion picture The Magnificent Seven, made back in the 60s, we must be taking a look at the Western genre. And what I'm going to be doing is we're going to take a look at 3 games in the Western genre: Avalon Hill's Gunslinger, my own spaghetti Western game, and the game Cowboys from Worthington. But before we get into that, I'm going to show how I got into the Western genre in the first place. Now, in the 50s and 60s, when I was growing up, it was not uncommon for a 10-year-old, 12-year-old to hop on a bus and go down to see the movies. And I did that quite a lot on Saturdays with friends. So I grew up learning about the West primarily through the films. So I saw all the big ones, like John Wayne's The Alamo, 1960 or so, another big picture, How the West Was Won, which was filmed in Cinerama, John Ford's Cheyenne Autumn, another favorite of mine, Charlton Heston in Major Dundee, which was a Civil War Western, and movies like Five Card Stud, starring Dean Martin and Robert Mitchum. And later on, 69, 70, when I was in college and stuff, movies like A Man Called Horse, and one of my favorites, Little Big Man. And of course, on late night TV, I was able to catch up with Westerns from a different era, the 40s, especially John Wayne's, what they call his Cavalry Trilogy, which was Fort Apache, one of my favorites, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and later Rio Grande. And another old favorite was Santa Fe Trail with Ronald Reagan and Errol Flynn. So that's how I was exposed to the Western genre, mainly through film. And I have to mention the Italian Western genre, which I got into with the first film, of course, A Fistful of Dollars, starring Clint Eastwood. The sequel, which is really good, Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef was in it. And of course the iconic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, featuring all 3, Eli Wallach, Lee Van Cleef, and Clint Eastwood. Later on, Once Upon a Time in the West, Charles Bronson, and I graduated all the other spaghetti westerns which were made throughout the 60s. Duck You Sucker, starring Rod Steiger, James Coburn, and many, many others, like the comedy western My Name is Nobody. So that's how I got into the Western genre, through the films. But when I got into war games, which was about 1969, there wasn't a lot in the Western genre for games. Now, checking the date on Gunslinger Avalon Hill, I think it's 1982. So there was not very much in the way of Western war games after I got into the genre. So we're going to look at these 3 mainly. I've already done some videos on 7th Cavalry, which influenced me quite a lot. I Will Fight No More Forever, which is all about Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce campaign. And of course, the great series by Michael Taylor, the what he calls the Indian Wars of the American West, Battle of Little Bighorn, Battle of Adobe Walls, and Rosebud Creek. I should do a video on Rosebud Creek alone. But we're going to take a look at Gunslinger, Spaghetti Western, and Cowboys. Okay, Avalon Hill's Gunslinger came out in 1982, and the manual had, 35 pages. And this was a very detailed game. It's man-to-man combat in the Old West. The rules were well illustrated with black and white illustrations. Lots of characters, townsfolk, bank, clerk, dude, fast Eddie, gambler, barkeep, lady, Chinese characters, all kinds. And it was a very, very detailed game. This was not an easy one to learn. I bought it in about 81, 82, but didn't actually play it for years later. They even had horses and stuff. You could mount up on horseback and move around. So I would not characterize this as a beginner game. You also got a lot of good scenarios, and the Avalon Hill General magazine featured several more over the years. So, and there's your terrain effects chart and stuff. Not an easy game to learn, in my opinion, but very well done game. You got a bunch of mounted boards. What do we got here? 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 boards, double-sided, where they were geomorphic. You could make various terrain in it. There we have some hilltop terrain with some trees, stone walls. Flip side, various buildings. And some scenarios you could have just taking place in one building, point blank range kind of thing. Again, some hills, or some trees rather, and different buildings. There's a corral, and more buildings, more open terrain. Like I said, you could put these all together to make various scenarios. And there's plenty of scenarios in the game. Mounted boards, large hexes, typical Avalon Hill quality for the time. Now, I'll zoom in on some of the counters. I think the faraway view won't give us much. Let's take a closer look. Okay, there's some of the representative counters, various colors. And you had these horse counters that were oversized. And I think you've got a wagon in here. You also got some horses that have been shot you could use as cover. And here's what they look like on the board. They were colorful, and they had a little arrow on them showing facing direction. One thing I did not like about the Avalon circular counters in general, they're a pain to pick up. Even with tweezers, you know, they're sometimes very problematic. Now here, you see what I mean? They slip out all the time. They were not easy to manipulate. And this was a very complicated game, by the way. Now, I remember getting a bunch of the guys over. I think we had a 6-player game one night with various buildings as the terrain and stuff, and some open terrain. And it was an easy game to teach, but to get proficient at the game, that took a while. And it just didn't use dice to resolve the combat. As you can see, it is man-to-man combat. And let me show you some of the cards, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, the game came with 2 sets of cards, and by today's standards, they were kind of rough, because they came, if I recall correctly, they came on a card and you had to punch them out. You can see the little wee lines here where they had to be removed from the sprue. There was a result deck, and there was these action decks. And when it was your turn in the game, you played a card, and the card described exactly what you were doing. Now, the amazing thing about this game was the time scale was seconds, or split seconds, depending on how you want to look at it. For example, let's say you had this character here, and he decided to play this draw and cock action. Well, how long does it take to draw and cock a gun? Not too long. You know, a second or two. Or you could use it as a shoot card. And then there was this load card. Swing, that was for hand-to-hand combat. Head out, head back. Let's say you were behind some terrain, behind a tombstone, or let's say you were behind this water trough here. You know, you could say, well, I'm sticking my head out to shoot, or I'm sticking it back to hide behind it. So each turn, like I said, represented split seconds. And there was just tons of these cards. And when you fired at somebody else, you didn't roll a dice. You looked on tables, and there was a multitude of those. Many, many tables here. All your townsfolk. The capabilities of one-handed guns. And they went from the era of cap and ball guns to the more modern 6-shooters. They had 200 guns, like shotguns, melee weapons, movable obstacles, rocks, ammo sources, and there was a lot of information. Each character technically had one of these sheets, which was on a pad, and you could write with a pencil all the information you needed, what you were doing, where your gun hand was. They had a multitude of weapons. You can see here. Let's say you had a Colt 45 here. You put it on your card there, meant it was in your gun hand. And you could name the gun and how many shots it had. You could switch the gun to the other hand. So the mine of information really was on these sheets. Then you could record wounds here. permanent wounds, serious gun hand, other hand, leg, endurance. It was, in every sense, like a miniatures game, though it did have a board and you were using counters. But I would rate this game as complex, not for the beginner. But as I was getting to the shooting, you didn't actually roll a dice. These cards were shuffled, the result card, and I haven't played this game in, at least 10, 15 years, so I can't tell you exactly how it worked. But you more or less drew this result card, and it sort of gave you the result. Now, storm, misfire, handgun, misfire. Yeah, see, if you had these kinds of weapons, they would be misfire. Delay, 1 delay point, wound, drop, hex straight ahead. Let's look at another one. So that was a malfunction card. You wouldn't want to get that card. That meant your weapon malfunction. There we go. There's a fire card. So depending on how much time you aimed, remember each turn represents split seconds, so if you took more time to aim, you get a much more vital hit, depending on the range. So, yeah, BE becomes a vital hit. So if this guy fired in, shorter time, there's even a chance he'd miss. If you took longer to aim, you'd have a much more chance of hitting. Of course, if you're taking more time to aim, you're also subject to somebody else firing at you and getting hit. So it was this infinite combination of range, the card, the players, what the objectives were, gave this game, you got a lot of bang for your buck. So Avalon Hill's Gunslinger, I still have it. I don't play it anymore. It's hard to get, 6 or 7 guys to play this thing, even though you could teach it fairly easily. I'm going to keep the game. I think it's one I'll always remember with fond affection. But that game, designed in 1982, years went by and I decided I wanted to do my own tactical man-to-man player game that would move even faster than the Avalon Hill one, and that I would be able to play in an environment with many players. And the game that I came up with was Spaghetti Western, and we'll take a brief look at that. Okay, Spaghetti Western. And there we have a scene from Once Upon a Time in the West. So I came up with a fast-moving game that's easy to learn. I can teach it in 10 minutes when I run it at the convention. Here in Ottawa, I run it once a year at the Can Games. This year it will not be run because of COVID-19 has canceled the convention. But I can accommodate up to like 14 players in this, and the game moves along. Each turn, when it comes your turn, you play in, let's say, less than 30 seconds. So the game is fast and fast-moving, and I like it for that reason. There's a little homemade box I made for it. Now, how many pages of rules? Well, like 6 pages of rules. It's like I said, you can teach it in 10, 15 minutes. And these are just various scenarios I've come up with for Can Games. And this one here we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Here are 12 characters fighting it out around this dry well. And of course we had scenery with the little buildings and everything. It is a miniatures game, not a board game. A game I called The Ecstasy of Gold. This is loosely based on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. A box canyon scenario, where some bad guys are trapped in a box canyon and the good guys come in and they got to flush them out. Things like that. It's a fast-moving game. And I made up these little charts so we could show individual kills. You'd write your character player down here and how many people you killed. Little coffins you just circled, and these are the characters. I'll show you some of the character cards I came up with. I think they're pretty good. I borrowed all kinds of things from other games too. Now, I'm not an original designer. What I try to do is take the best of games I've seen in the past, borrow some of the good concepts in them, and take out the ones I don't like. So for Spaghetti Western, my game revolved around, to a large degree, the character cards. I'll show them a little bit closer here in a second. So we've got, these are ones I've made up from the movies. Tuco from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Alfago, Bambino, Duncan. That's from Navajo Joe. The Dutchman, that's Peter Graves, of course. The Mercenary, the Polak, Django, of course, Trinity, and each of them had various abilities. For example, Trinity, when he fired, he'd have 3 dice, and with fists, he'd be 2 dice. And you get characters like, okay, Rubel Noon was in it. He's good with a pistol, not so great with his fists. Frank, cold-blooded killer from Once Upon a Time in the West. There was all these characters. And in the game, you would take a character and you would play that one single character. Now, in playing the game, we had this action deck. Every single character in the game had a corresponding action card. And what you would do is you'd shuffle the deck, and the games master, in this case myself, the game would start. And we'd flip a card, and whoever was taking Bill Kiowa would move his character, which might take him 10-15 seconds. Then the next character, Harmonica, would move. Then old Squint Eye would move, and so on. The game would just flowed very, very quickly. You know, I gave each person about 30 seconds, at most a minute, to do their move. That was the only way you could keep the game alive and moving and to show the action. It would make no sense to have a character sort of stand there with his character and decide, yeah, well, should I go here? Should I go there? Maybe I should hide behind this tree or something, you know. It just didn't make any sense. And, you know, I drew up or painted up characters myself. I'll try to zoom in on those. Now, I painted up a mess of these characters, and I'm no graphic artist. I have no skill at painting. Plus, I don't really have the patience for them. But there's a character that I kind of chose for the Clint Eastwood character with his little poncho and stuff. There's a Native American. I think he's supposed to be Tonto, I think. He's got his bow and arrow. This is a character I decided to be Sartana. Don't know if you've seen any of the Sartana movies, but the guy's all dressed in black, and he only kills people that need killing, according to him. Another Native American. I like having them in. And we got a guy with a bowler hat here. Pistol. And that's supposed to be Tuco from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Again, don't laugh. I can't paint very well. So, playing with miniatures, of course, made these games just come alive. And when we get to Cowboys, which I'll show you, you can actually use miniatures too. And, I don't know, the man-to-man level game is just a lot of fun. As you can see, I haven't really treated these figures with the respect that is due. Originally, I had these little wee a foam box here to put individual characters in, but over time, you just kind of throw them in the box and be done with it. Again, make my own little box to put the characters in. And so that's it for Spaghetti Western. It's the game that I created. There's some charts I made up there for pistols, shotguns, rifles, the various ranges. Got point blank fighting, there's fist fighting in here. Modifiers for when you moved. Made up some good counters for it too, which God knows where they are. Well, they're probably in the scenery box. Oh no, they're not, they're right here. So, I'll show you some of those. Of course, you need the type of weapons and stuff. There's a counter to show you when you've moved. You put this beside your counter after you've moved, and you get a modifier, a little bit harder to hit. Of course, there's the pistols. Nearly all my characters have those. And I've got some weapons with 2 hands. Whether it's for Native Americans, you've got your tomahawks, you've got ammunition too in it. And it was a fast-moving game. We all have a lot of fun with it at Can Games. And there's your rifles, 16 shots and stuff. And for the ammunition tracking, I just borrowed these from Cowboys. I made copies of the cards. They're mounted on cardboard stock, and you can keep track of ammunition. So I owe some of the game components to the game Cowboys, which we'll take a look at next. Now, I've never tried to get Spaghetti Western published, anything like that. I just couldn't be bothered trying to tangle through the intellectual rights that would be required to get my character cards copyrighted and stuff like that. Probably couldn't get the copyright anyway. So This is a game I just run once a year at our Can Games convention, and I'm quite content to do so. Now the reason I'm showing you this game second is because this is the order that I discovered these games. In other words, I discovered Gunslinger first, then I came up with my own spaghetti western, and then I got Cowboys. And I'll explain there in that part of the video why I did get Cowboys. Okay, when Worthington's Cowboys came out, I purchased it right away. And the reason was that, though I loved my spaghetti western game, it really was a western designed for, 10, 12, 14 players. It moved fast, but it was a miniatures game, which meant setting up a whole frontier town and getting scenery, painting it up. It took a long time to set up, and I only got to play it once a year. So I wanted something that would fill that gap, and Cowboys certainly filled that. Let's take a look at the pieces. Cowboys, The Way of the Gun. Love the cover artwork, by the way. It's by Gary Zaboli, and it shows Wyatt Earp, and of course the infamous OK Corral in the background. As always, the Worthington Company always comes up with superior components. They are very well done, and we'll take a look at each one individually. The booklet itself, it's a small, shiny paper kind of book. It's only 12 pages of rules, profusely illustrated. It's a very easy game to learn, explaining how the tracks work, explaining the cards, showing you the counters. It's a very easy game to learn. I remember teaching this to my girlfriend and a friend of hers too. We played a couple of Gunslinger actions, and her friend, who is totally new to war games, beat the crap out of the two of us. It was a lot of fun. And this was designed by the Wileys, Grant, Mike, and Kevin. And it's a simple game, but a good one. You also get this scenario booklet, a bunch of scenarios in there, a couple of person-to-person gunfights there. Of course, the infamous shoot at the OK Corral. And how many scenarios here? 15... Wow, it's 20. I never tried that many. 26 scenarios. So you certainly can't kick about that. You get a lot of bang for your buck in this. Your charts are very simple. I think you just get, one chart. Gun type, pistol, rifle, shotgun, and your turn record. Now each turn in this game, again, I don't know the scale, but it would represent, minute, seconds, not sure. Let's take a look at the boards. Much like the Avalon Hill Gunslinger game, you get a bunch of boards, 6 boards, double-sided, in full color, showing you various terrain, and they are geomorphic, so you can make yourself up a little town the way you want for a big scenario. They fit together no problem. One difference from the Avalon Hill, this is a square grid, and I'll get to that in a moment. Again, different terrain on the outside, on the other side rather. If you want to do something out in the prairies, an ambush behind rocks or something. And they were all geomorphic, they fitted together, and you can make all kinds of scenarios. And overhead views always reminded me of the old Clue game where you're looking down on the room. But we had a lot of fun with this one. There's a neat scenario too, maybe for a box canyon scenario. And I'll show you obviously that's a bunkhouse, right? Yeah, a whole bunch of beds, windows, the old privy out there. Let's take a look at the counters, and I'll look at them closer because they're quite nice. Okay, there's some of the characters that come in the game, and you do get a whole mess of them here. There's a lot. And you just put them on these little plastic stands, giving them a three-dimensional feel. And of course, if you have your own miniatures, you can substitute them too. The characters are reminiscent of the movies that I grew up with. For example, this kind of looks like your John Wayne character as he appeared in the movie Hondo, the buckskin jacket. This obviously is a reference to Clint Eastwood in Fistful of Dollars. I believe that's your Butch Cassidy kind of character. And I don't know who this guy would be. That could be Doc Holliday in Gunfight at the OK Corral. Anyway, you get a variety of characters. There's your Mexican character. Guy with a red shirt. recognize him from somewhere. And another dude here with a shotgun. So the characters were really cool. I really liked them, and they look good on the board. Okay, and there's a little stagecoach counter. I'm not sure how that worked in the game because I didn't play any scenario with a stagecoach in it. Now, you get these other markers too, which are used, much like my spaghetti western game, when a character moves. Little arrow on him to show he's moving. You got these, whoop, no, that's from my spaghetti western game. You got all kinds of weapons, of course, like I had in my game. The pistol, a lot of pistols here. And there's a rifle. Good quality counters, by the way, really good. A few more of the characters. It was kind of neat. They were two-dimensional. You got the back of the character and the front. I thought that was cool. That's obviously Wild Bill Hickok. Recognize him. Now I'm almost sure that that's Billy the Kid because I've seen pictures of him. And you got horses too. I'm not sure how they work because I didn't play any scenario with the fellows mounted. Like I said, there's 26 scenarios and I certainly have not played them all. Now the tracks included with the game were very well done. So let's say you had your Hondo character here. You'd have your own individual track. Let's say he was armed with a pistol. You'd put the pistol on the 6th column to show he's got 6 rounds. Every time you fired, of course, you'd move the pistol down. That was always handy. And if you holstered his pistol, you just flipped it to the other side. Very simple but elegant system. And if you had a rifle, of course, you'd do the same with your rifle piece. And if your character had a shotgun, well, guess where it went? It went on the shotgun column here. You had 2 barrels. Every time you fired one, you moved the marker down. Of course, the same thing went for the rifle. 16 shots, which tells us the game more or less is portraying the period around 1870 or so. Because I think that's when the Winchester 73 came in, around there. Anyway, that's the tracks. Now, I'll show you another aspect of the game. It's an important aspect of the game, and it's the only one that I had trouble with. And I'll explain in a moment why. Now, most of the cards were just plain common sense, and each character got some cards during the game, and it gave him an extra action or something. It added a lot of, an element of spice to the game for sure. For example, this one, Adrenaline. Any one cowboy or townfolk may move twice, or move and shoot in the same turn. That gave you a definite advantage. Good day for killing. You add a +1 to your die when you shoot. That was pretty good. Same thing here, except it adds +2. All of these cards made sense. Just follow the directions and you'd be fine. Deadeye again, adding 2. Now, this one was interesting. Gun jam, because it doesn't happen in the movies much, but weapons of the period could jam. And you could throw this on your enemy before he fired, and be rather embarrassing if his gun jams. This is the one that threw me for a loop, because with all these cards, you just do what it says. So I figured it must be the same in this game, because in my spaghetti western game that I designed before this one came out, if a character fell down, for example, let's say a character, in my game at least, was shot and he fell down. Well, he had to spend an action to get up. Makes sense? So that's the way I thought this card worked, because that's what it says. It says, pick one opponent, cowboy, or townfolk to fall. They may perform no other actions this turn. So when we first played it, we kind of played it the way I had designed it in Spaghetti Western. The character falls down. Then I realized in the rules, there's nothing in the rules that describes falling down or getting up. It's just a concept that just isn't there. So that's but the only card I had a little bit of a problem with. But I understand what he was saying abstractly. So what you do is you throw this card on your opponent, and somewhere in his turn he's said to have fallen down and he can't perform any actions, but you don't physically put him down. He stays on his feet. It's like a delayed action. So fair enough. The game certainly works very well, and it moves along very well too. I'd love to try this one in a multiplayer environment, play with a bunch of guys. So that's why I purchased Cowboys, The Way of the Gun. It allows me to play a Western game in a board game environment with a much smaller footprint than a standard miniatures game. And I'm looking forward to, they've advertised now, the sequel to Cowboys, Cowboys 2, which is the Cowboys and Indians edition. And that's on Kickstarter right now. So I'm hoping that is successful and it will come out. So that wraps up my video on games of the Old West. I am working on another project which is kind of dear to my heart. It's not finished. It's going to be a board war game, which I'm calling Soldier and Brave. And it's going to be about Indians, Native Americans, against U.S. cavalry. And I'm going to have scenarios from about 1866, Fetterman Massacre, up to Wounded Knee. And that's an ongoing project that I'd like to get finished. But that's it for my little review of Western games. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for watching.